it's the software that just craps out on me once in a while. So I'm gonna go back and see. I think there's still a room here to do a couple of more mouth examples. Oops. All right, we're set. Alright, so just continuing on from last week. Something that I talked about was how there isn't really any exact way of drawing a mouth. That it varies. The shape of it varies, and the best way to learn how to draw it is by just drawing from real life, drawing faces as much as possible, as often as possible, and that way you can recognize the similarities. Your line work will improve. You know, there's a difference obviously from doing something so simple as this for a mouth and that, right? It's noticing the variation in the lines as you're drawing the lips. And that just that comes with practice, you know, just having to draw them over and over again. Just drawing in general really improves your line work. Noticing little bits of detail, you know, that go into drawing the face features. And that's just something that really develops with how much you even challenge yourself. You know, if each time you sit down and you draw something the same way that you always draw, you know, or you don't really try to push yourself to the next level of seeing detail, you're kind of stuck. You know, your line work is in the same place. But if each time you sit down with a determination in your mind to say, like, hey, I'm gonna draw this, whatever the subject is, as exact as possible, you will push yourself to the next level. You know, that's just like, you know, you ready yourself mentally for that challenge by saying that, and by really trying to focus as much as possible. And with that determination, you will notice, like, your line work will improve. You know, there are certain things that you can do to make it easier for yourself. The same way that you have guidelines for drawing the figure, right? As you guys have seen before in these examples where you're seeing like basic shapes used to construct the entire figure. The same can go for mouth features. You know, like here, as you could see, I was using a Y as an example. So just to demonstrate again, I'm going to use this Y shape, and what it does, it just helps you construct it better. So you know, between these two lines, this is where the dip is in the lips. This is where, like, let's say the hill is, right? And then this bottom shape right here is basically the bottom of the lip. Right, and from there you can connect these other lines to it. And they generally follow the same shape as the line of the lip above, just not as exaggerated, or sometimes it can be. You know, really, again, it depends on the person and their lip shape. And challenge yourself to see that in photos that you draw. Let me just bring this up further up before I continue. Yeah, challenge yourself to notice difference in lips. You know, if you find somebody with like interesting lip shape, draw that. You know, that's exciting. That's something that's new. And again, it's going to push you to draw. It's going to push you to practice. Another fun way to exercise drawing. So this line right here from the Y shape is basically connecting the two halves. As you can see here, it's divided into 3 at the top, the 2 being right in the middle, and then the bottom is divided into 2 sections. So the same as it is here. So this is like your training wheels, let's just say. The Y shape is your training wheel. And you could keep using it, drawing it over and over until you improve your line work. You know, for this half, let's say, you really focus on making the lines here as they are in the references that you're using. You know, because despite this only being one part of it, one third of the lip, it does have line variation. Now it starts off and it kind of swoops inwards, but then as it goes up to create this like mountain, I want to say, right? Within that line, there's some variation. It might come out more, you know, or sometimes it might not. It might be a little bit smoother, or it might be more flat, and that line varies. But the more you practice that, the better it is for your line work library as well. You know, so just talking about things like visual library, the more stuff that you draw, like you draw animals, you draw buildings, you practice draw cars, you know, all those references, you're helping to build your visual library. And the same thing when it comes to drawing face features or practicing many different type of face features. You are improving your line work, your line visual library. You're not always drawing like, you know, these very simplified lines and shapes. You're, by practicing all these different angles, by practicing all these different type of lips, you're improving your hand-eye coordination, you're improving the flexibility within your arm, within your wrist, within your fingers. You know, the more, it's very similar to exercising. The more you stretch your muscles, the more you stretch your bone, or not bones, but like, yeah, the more you stretch your muscles, the more you stretch your figure, the more you're capable of doing, the more flexible you become, right? And you lessen your injuries. So there are benefits to it. And the same idea is when it comes to this, the more flexible your fingers are, the more flexible your wrist is, and the more in sync your hand-eye coordination is, the more variation in your lines come out. But yeah, if you use this this training wheel, basically, it allows you to focus section by section and making sure that things are parallel to each other. For instance, you're not going to have this, let's say this mountain, lower than this one. You want to make sure they're on the same line. You know, that's a very important aspect when it comes to drawing the human figure. You really want to make sure that things are lined up properly with each other. So for instance, things like, let's say the nostril, right? You don't want to have one nostril higher than the other one. You want to make sure that they both end on the same line. Same thing with the eyes. You want to make sure that they line up and that one isn't higher or lower. And I mean very meticulous when it comes to that, because just a slight bit off is going to throw off your drawing. It's going to break the drawing, basically. So it's really important. That's one of the reasons why Whenever you guys have seen me draw the figure, seen me draw the head, I show you guys the guidelines that I use for it. And that's what they're there for, is to ensure that everything is lined up, that the eyes line up, the eyebrows line up, that the nostrils line up, the lip is on the same line, and this is a very common one, this is what this example shows, the angles on the chin, these parts right here, are on the same line. And this kind of shows a broken drawing. You know, you could see that the nose isn't drawn right down the middle of the line. Like if I was to draw a line straight down, you could see that despite this being a straight perspective, right, the person is facing directly towards the camera, which is suggested by the shape of the chin. It's not 3/4 view, it's directly in front. So because of that, you know it's a front view, and everything should be on that line, on that middle line. So the lips should be on that, should divide equally using that middle line, and the nose should be right underneath, and like the bottom of the nose, this area, should be right on that middle line as well. Whereas here you could see it, when a person isn't paying attention to these things, it's shifted and it looks weird, right? It's a weird looking drawing. As well as the angle of the lips. The lips are kind of tilted, you know, despite them suggesting that there isn't any like sort of face expression or anything. It's just crooked. It's a crooked mouth. The nose isn't lined up. One eye is higher than the other one. The chin lines, these corners right here are not on the same line. As you can see, one is higher, the other one is lower. So all this stuff, when it's not in place, breaks the drawing, and it doesn't make it look right. Regardless of how much detail you end up putting in, maybe you're really good at shading, and you start shading in all these areas. If the drawing is broken from the beginning, it's not going to be, good. So in the beginning, you know, this is just following something that I've said before. It seems very meticulous, and you have to pay attention to all these details. But the more you do that, the more you'll come around to being able to draw without these guidelines. And first, you have to train your hand-eye coordination and your eye to get used to all these details, to be able to recognize these mistakes. And then after you do that, after you're able to memorize it, and remember, you don't even have to use those references anymore. It just comes around to you naturally. The same way as something that I use frequently as an analogy, when you're learning the alphabet, right? You have to recite it multiple times. You have to say it over and over, write it, you know, do it several times a day. And then eventually you didn't have to recite, right? When you sit down to read, now you don't recite the alphabet and pronounce every single letter. You just read. So the same thing here. You know, this right here, learning the figure using these basic shapes, learning how to draw the figure using these guidelines and paying attention to these details, that's your alphabet. You know, this is your learning grammar. You know, this is something that you just repeatedly do over and over, and then eventually, just like reading, you won't have to do that anymore. You'll be able to just start from any part of the face, and everything will make sense in relationship to each other because your eye and your hand-eye coordination has really gotten used to it. So don't get discouraged. You know, a lot of people think when you sit down to draw, you should just be able to do it. It's this like instinctive, you know, prodigy sort of experience where you're just like, boom, 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 everything's right. But that's not the case. You know, there are people who could do that, but that isn't the only way for you to be able to draw, for you to be able to understand drawing. And that's the entire goal. You know, it's not to prove to yourself that you're this like prodigy. You know, that's something that hasn't anything to do with art anymore. It has to just do with your ego. You're just interested in saying, I'm just like this amazing person. As opposed to focusing on art and being like, I really like drawing. I really like, you know, the outcome of that. I like the process. I enjoy sitting down, drawing on paper, or doing it digitally. You know, I like the outcome. I like the creativity. You know, all those things should take precedence over, you know, this like idea of like, oh, I'm just incredibly good and like I don't even have to do anything to do it. You know, that's just not what it's about, really. And the same thing applies to other things like music. You know, if you're really into music or whatever, just because you pick up an instrument and you're not amazing immediately, doesn't mean it's not worth learning. You know, it is an experience. And once you learn it, just like you did your ability to read and write, then you'll be able to express yourself. You know, just like now you sit down and you could write your thoughts and you could write your ideas and express yourself using words. It translates into music. You know, you're able to do that with music as well. You're able to do that with writing, or dancing. If you're a person who enjoys dancing, it's the same idea. You know, it's a way of expressing yourself using your body. And all those things come from just regular practice, really loving the process, you know, loving what it's really about. You know, somebody who really loves dancing, it's not because they're trying to like show off or whatever else. They just really enjoy movement, you know, and they really enjoy expressing or coming up with ways of expressing their themselves and their body, using their body. So all of those like, or writing, you know, it's the same concept. But you have to just continuously practice to take it to the next level, you know. So I think it's just something very important to keep in mind. And you'll have many people who think otherwise. You know, there are a lot of people who don't pay attention to any of that stuff, and their idea of art is basically what I was talking about before. Oh, if you're not a prodigy, it's not worth doing. You know, if you're not gifted, quote unquote, then it's not worth pursuing or something. You're wasting your time, and that's just absolutely wrong. But you have to be, in a way, aware of that. You know, that is a reality. That is something that's going to be around all the time. There's a lot of people who don't understand things in that way, and they just understand it from like this very generic presentation of art, you know, from things that they might have heard, or they've casually discussed or heard people discussing it or something, and that's where it started and ended for them, you know. So I think yeah, it's something to keep in mind as you're learning, as you're pushing through to take yourself to the next level, is that it's about the process. It's about really enjoying whatever art form you're interested in, and that you will absolutely reach a great level of whatever it is that you're pursuing, from practice, from determination, from, you know, the same very similar process as other learning endeavors. You just got to stick with it, and you have to do it often. trying to see, it's another example that I could do before I turn this page. You do a skeletal example of the mouth. And when it comes to this kind of these kind of examples, I want to say it's very similar to, let's say, how a clock works, like your old school watch, right? You look at it and you see it moving and it being able to tell time. You see the handles moving, and it just kind of works the way it does, but we don't really understand why this stuff works the way it does or how it really works, you know. But once you open it up and you pay attention to all the little details, you could understand the importance of everything that's on there, you know, and why it actually, and how it actually all works together. It's kind of similar to, you know, doing this kind of work. Like you guys, for those of you who are returning viewers, you've seen me do like skeletal examples or muscular examples where I draw like all the muscles, all the details, basically underneath the skin. So it's the same concept. It's like opening up the watch and seeing how all the, you know, all the nuts and bolts create the shape that it is, and how it makes it, how it's all put together, and you know, where the place is for everything. And now it's not as mysterious, you know. If you really took the time to study and understand all those things, you would be able to just build one from scratch, or take it apart and put it together and like fix it. And you know, if things stopped working, you would know exactly what to do in order to change it. So the same idea is here. Like if you understand how, or like what the bones are, like what the underneath structure is like, then putting parts of the face together makes sense. You know, you understand like, oh, this is where the cheekbone is, this is why there's a line here, you know, this is why this part of the jaw is out, you know. So you get yourself more familiar with the internal parts, and the external parts start to make sense. The shadows of the external parts start to make sense. You're no longer just creating shadows because you just drew shadows this way. You're now shading according to the skeletal structure, the bone structure, and that allows you to have playroom. You know, you could exaggerate certain things, but the general placement of them is accurate. You know, you're not going to draw the cheekbone all the way further down. You know that it's in the eye socket vicinity, so you could play around with that. Another important detail is drawing teeth. As you could see, you know, depending on the angle, actually, the few front teeth are visible in their full spectrum. But as they go further and further back, you don't see the full amount of the teeth or the full shape of the teeth. It starts to curve inwards and perspective starts to go into play. So when you are, let's say you're drawing it in like an open mouth, in this example, you guys can't really see anything. It's just suggested by these like curves underneath in shadow to show like separation in teeth. But there are some people who tend to give it slight shading, you know, to show where the division is, and that requires some skill to do, because you don't want to end up giving the person like rotting looking teeth with drawing dark lines or really thick lines between the teeth. That's like a big mistake that people often make. But yeah, once you understand the shape and how it just kind of curves and what they're drawn like, when you draw it from imagination, again, it'll help you make the right lines, you know, make the right right lines in perspective. another opportunity to practice shading. And I am gonna make the final drawing here for this page. As you guys can see, I'm still continuing the pursuit of drawing all over the paper or the page that I'm working on. Make sure not to waste any of it. Any of the pages, you know, this is one of the reasons why I'm going back on an old sketchbook. This is a 5-year-old one, I think. I was just looking through stuff, and when I was looking at my new sketchbook that I have, I figured, why not? You know, why not go back on these pages and actually fill up the pages the way I should have back then? And yeah, a lot of it just was this bad habit that I've developed. To some extent, you know, now that I'm working in this sketchbook, I'm realizing that it's just the paper. The paper is extremely thin. So like if you work with a pen, or if you pressed a little too hard, you could see it on the other page. And that's just from pencil use, not even inks or anything. And then when it came to inks, it was even more apparent from page to page. But there are pages that I noticed that I just kind of wasted. You know, as you can see, I'm still doing stuff on here that I could have been doing back then as well. But I got used to this feeling when it comes to paper. Like, there is a difference when you're drawing on, let's say, a paper that's had heavy use, and a blank page that's resting on top of many other blank pages. There's like a certain feel that's slightly different. You know, you feel a little bit more firmness, I guess, in the page, and being able to draw on it, as opposed to one that's had a lot of work done on the other side, and it's kind of like warped a little bit. So I kind of got used to that feeling, and I would just skip a page in order to get to that situation. So it is, I think, important to really pick your sketchbooks. You know, this is one area I'm absolutely I'm extremely happy that there is variety in. You know, there's certain things that I feel like shouldn't have variety in, like iPhone chargers. I think it's such a waste. Like, just make all of them the same. Like, you don't need to have variation in iPhone chargers. As long as it charges the device, just keep it the same. You know, to have competition for that, and have a bunch of products made and wasted for that sort of thing, it should be illegal. It's a waste of energy. It's a waste of energy. It's a waste of resources that, you know, are causing a lot of problems all over the world, just so that they can compete with each other, and there's no real benefit to having that variety. Whereas with like pages and books and sketchbooks, there's absolutely an advantage. You know, for instance, the thicker the paper is, the more different type of mediums you can use. You know, the thinner it is, the easier it is for you to be able to trace. You know, and all those have their need in the process. So in cases like that, I absolutely support variety, and you know, each company has their own process of how they make the paper. So for instance, with this one, it's not coarse and it's not incredibly thick, whereas there's other paper or sketch pads that are thick. The paper is thick, but the paper is also very coarse, you know, so when you're making lines, it's not really good for pencil use because it grinds the pencil and your lines look jaggedy, but it might be good for watercolor, you know, so there's variation for it, and each type has its benefits. So yeah, just, you know, I would suggest for those of you who are looking for a good sketchbook to do a little testing. You know, go to your local art shop, and it's a great way to keep supporting them. To a great way to even maybe make connections or get to know somebody who's also really into the art field and talk about stuff. Talk shop, you know, go in there and ask them questions about, like, hey, could I test out these sketchbooks and see what kind of paper, and you know, I'm looking for this kind of paper that has a little bit more, let's say it doesn't have too much texture, is kind of thick, isn't incredibly slick or really smooth, which I personally don't like. I think it doesn't feel good. Shading isn't great for that kind of paper because the paper doesn't absorb the graphite well. So yeah, take your time and see, you know, maybe for you it works, maybe you like that, and it really brings out the best in your work. But you won't know until you try the different types of paper. And go in there and ask, you know, hey, do you guys have any samples of the sketchbooks that you have available? Like, I'm looking for this kind of paper. And most places, I think they do. They have like a sheet of paper or like a test sketchbook, so people can actually draw in it and see if they like it or not. At least the times that I remember. You know, I don't have an art store around here, but the times that I did, and I went in, I remember all sorts of drawings done in a sketchbook that they had, along with other ones for sale, which is pretty cool. You would see some interesting work once in a while. Somebody who got carried away and really got into the drawing, I thought was pretty cool.
Don't cry.
Alright, y'all, so with this final drawing here, I am going to take a 5-minute break and get ready for the next stream, which is drawing comics. I'm going to be back and I'm going to be doing John Buscema's Conan the Barbarian. I'm excited about it. This is... This is where we left off last time. I'm going to be continuing with these other panels, maybe refining this one a little bit more. So stick around. I'll be back in 5 minutes. And for the rest of y'all, if you guys enjoy this content, remember to hit the like and subscribe button. They both help the stream grow. You know, they reach out to a wider audience, and of course, it would be greatly appreciated. With that said, y'all, I'll see you in 5.